Hey there, this is Celia with Embodied with Plants. Thanks for joining me today. I'm going to talk about the metal element in East Asian Chinese medicine theory and the lung and large intestine energy kind of related to that and how it relates to fall. The reason I want to do this is I think we hold on to a lot of stuff from the summer, harvest time, any other time. And in fall, our energy body just naturally contracts and descends. And so our capacity to hold those things while we're still the same, like our physical body is still the same and the things we hold might be the same, but because of that like inward and contracting energy, it is an excellent time to reflect upon what is going on related to the metal element and the lung and large intestines. Emotionally, this has to do with grief, sadness, loss, sorrow, the heavy, hard things. And while it's not any like more important than any other organ system, any other element, any other emotion, it is one that I think deserves a little bit extra time and energy to like both sit with and basically I would love it if we had more systems to help us deal with grief and more kind of cultural community support for that. But since we have to work so goddamn much, like we just don't have the time built into our lives. We don't have the support from living seasonally with the earth. And so if we can just add a little bit of the metal areas of expertise or the metal like strengths, basically. If we can attune ourselves to what is happening with the earth and our bodies and our organ systems and our energy body, then we can really get a lot out of it. It's just an excellent time this time of year to reflect, to process. I mean, more so than any other time. Now, you could be a metal type person and have that as your constitution. I'll probably talk a little bit about that. So if that's kind of who you are and that's in your nature, any of us can do anything that we want any time of the year, right? But as a general whole, this is an excellent time to just reflect and process. And so I'm going to talk about how we can work with the metal element from the theory of working with excess and deficiency. So this is like not going to be Chinese medicine based in like the physiological, pathological organ system approach as to like what's actually going on with your physical body from that perspective. It's more about the archetypes, more inspirational, like it's more like a metaphor. Not that Chinese medicine is just a metaphor, it really has purposes, but I really want to focus on inviting these elements, the metal element, into a reflective process or whatever you want to do. It doesn't have to be like that, but just want to like take some time to be like, what are we going through? What is this element and what is fall and what are the lung and large intestines? What are they really about and how can we best work with them? Okay, so here's what we're going to talk about. The pathology, the physiology, and practices that I have to recommend. But first I want to talk a little bit more about what is metal, what's lung, large intestine energy, and fall. So I'm probably going to use these terms interchangeably. However, they, in practice have more differentiation. Like lung isn't exactly metal and metal isn't exactly large intestine, and they're not, exactly synonymous with the the spirit of the lung and large intestine. But in this, like I said, I want to be general. I want to be more metaphorical so that we can, wherever you are, you can bring that into your daily life or give some insight, whatever it may be. I just want to provide some background, some framework, and some tools. Okay, so this might not apply to you. That's fine. That's great. Like, use what works for you and get rid of the rest. And it doesn't even apply to me all the time. And there are like a bajillion ways that you can work with balancing excess and deficiency and working with lung and large intestine. There's so many on every single different layer of who we are. So just respect where you're coming from and what works for you. Okay. So the lungs, fall. So I see fall as a time of a transference of energy. It is, I feel fall is like a container that we go through, and it's like a crucible of alchemical processes. So we are different on the other side. And what that change is that summer and late summer, early fall, which is its own season in Chinese medicine theory, it's ruled by the earth element, and it's related to stomach and spleen. So that harvest time, and then above it, summer, is very expansive and yang, and energy's up. And then it naturally starts to contract, and it goes through the fall time. And then on the other side, it comes out, and it's the most like material that we can be, and that is winter. And that's, winter is more than just the road to fall, or I'm sorry, fall is more than just the highway to winter. I do think that if we take care of all parts of our body and being in whichever ways we feel inspired to during fall, that we can prevent a lot of like excess tension and pain and problems in the winter. Like, that's true. But fall is more than just like preventative care for winter fallout. It's a season in and of itself. And it, in East Asian medicine, Chinese medicine theory, is the lung and large intestine are paired together, and they're about holding and letting go. Grief, sorrow, sadness, loss are held within the lungs. And these are the types of emotions that come up during this time. And this can be just, it's obvious because when we cry, that comes out of kind of the upper respiratory area, and it comes out of the lungs. That's like where the sob comes from, and where the gasp, and like you just feel it here. I mean, a lot of that deep emotionality is related to the heart as well, but really specifically, it's related to sadness and grief. One kind of hang up I think that many people have, just kind of collectively here in modern Western world, is that because of our extreme oppressed emotions, just we're not very emotionally mature as a whole. Now, I know a lot of people come from different cultural backgrounds and even different family backgrounds, different parts of the world where emotions are not as repressed for them as they are here. So I want to acknowledge that this is like coming mostly from my perspective as a white woman of Northern European descent. You know, like there were things that I was modeled that you just kind of take things and you don't stand up for yourself, and you want to be good, and you can't talk too loud, and you can't do whatever, you know, like that sort of emotionality. It's like you kind of sweep it under the rug and just endure. Now, specifically related to where I'm coming from, it's kind of like a Christian, puritanical sort of thing, like just do as much as you can for everybody else in your lifetime, work hard, contribute to something that's greater than you, and then you'll get your reward in heaven, basically. Like, it doesn't matter how much you suffer now, it doesn't matter how much grief or sorrow you have, Just when you die, then you'll go to heaven if you're good enough and you've been saved. It's kind of this thing that I've heard. And from that perspective, it's like if the epitome of our spiritual life comes after this life, if the afterlife is where we become one with spirit or God, if that's where we feel joy and live in paradise, then why take the time to make this life count? Is part of my own, this is just an example of like one thing that I've kind of been going through. And that can come out in a variety of ways. Like when you're dealing with grief and sadness, sorrow, sometimes what comes through when you really sit with those feelings, like in the fall time for reflection, when we become closer and more intimate and inwards, it's like we're pulled into the same room as grief, where in the summertime it's like we were just in the same town, but now since our energy is smaller, we're sitting together. What can come through dealing with sadness and loss is kind of the more personalized emotions. And since many of us, some of us collectively tend to be emotionally repressed, the feelings, the expressions of feeling sorry for yourself or having pity, or kind of like when you get to the point where you ask, why me? Why is this happening to me? Other people have things and I want them and I don't get them. And that's where you're at with wondering why you had a loss or things didn't work out the way that it did. Those emotions are like normal to feel that. But so many people, like what I've been taught, is that it's like, well, you have good things, so maybe you didn't get what you wanted, but don't feel sorry for yourself. Like, and then we turn into feeling embarrassed about what we're feeling. But during the fall time, that's the level of emotionality that can come out. In any case, it's like the lungs, they're naturally constrictive. The energy comes in and energy is descending. And sometimes our emotionality around sorrow, grief, loss can just be too constrictive. It's like, you're not allowed to feel pity for yourself. You're not allowed to ask why me. You're not allowed to wonder why somebody has something good and you don't. Those constrictions can it just doesn't allow the full expression of what needs to be said and what needs to be felt or what is being felt. And so in the crossroads of that, we can have a lot of tension in our body, a lot of tension in the lungs. And tension can lead to stagnation. Stagnation can lead to just outright pain or imbalance. Now, I don't think that every single emotion results in a physical symptom. I don't think every single physical symptom is because of a spiritual or energetic or emotional reason. Sometimes those happen, but like the cookbook definitions of, all of that stuff is, it's good for inspiration, but really the answers to how much of a emotional or spiritual component to my physical illness do I have, really that's something that you can only be the one to figure out, I think. And just straight up, sometimes a lot of times the body just malfunctions. We're in a physical body, it malfunctions. It's just normal. So not every accident or every problem has an emotional reason. Now, stress definitely can be a huge component. Trauma can be a huge component. Intergenerational trauma, oppression, poverty, all sorts of things are huge stressors on us. That's true. But I don't want to say that like we manifest our illness or by having certain emotions. Okay. Even if something does have emotionality attached to it, like a certain pain, even in those states, even with myself, who I, you know, will work with emotions held in my body. Like I'm working with emotions held in my right body here. And yeah, there's emotions that I need to deal with. But you know what? Like I've had injuries to this shoulder. Like as a 3-year-old, my shoulder went out of the socket multiple times and it's just forever been wonky. And so I can't overlook that, first of all. And second of all, I think because of the way that my shoulder was injured, it can kind of hold emotions. It's like it has stress patterns. It gets stressed so easily. So I remember times where I was up at night writing papers or writing with my hand, trying to do homework or like trying to get a point across. And that stress is held within this arm. If I never had those injuries, I don't think that would have been a sponge for that. Maybe that stress would have gone somewhere else. Maybe you would have no bodily attachment at all. So, I mean, that should be its own talk in and of itself. So again, know that I'm talking as a metaphor, lungs related to sorrow, to grief. Now you could have lung problems and not have any loss or any sorrow. You could have extreme loss and it's held in like your right toe, on your right big toe. Like there doesn't have to be a rhyme or reason to where that goes. It's based on you and your body, time and space. And yeah, so I just want to put that out there. Okay, so back to the lungs and okay, so the lungs are very porous. They're very open. At one point, the lungs in Chinese medicine were considered to be a somewhat curious or extraordinary organ. Now, the curious organs are organs that don't fit into the typical organ system, and they kind of have their own MO and do their, like the brain is an organ, and the uterus is a curious organ. The marrow is a curious organ. Because of the nature of the lungs being so, they're solid on one hand, and then they're very air-filled and open on another hand. That's why for a brief time it was considered a potential or straight up just an actual curious organ. And they do absorb a lot. And I find that they absorb a lot, especially when we were little kids, like between the age of birth and 7. This is just my own theory. So, you might, it's not going to apply to everybody. It's just an observation that I made. But the lungs are related to our first breath. Like when we first came into the world, we're first really incarnating in a physical form on Earth and not just in our womb carrier. And also the lungs can relate, and the metal element too, can relate to the moment of conception. So that's like when the spirit is really coming down into form, and then when we're born and breathe, that's another layer of that. In Chinese medicine theory, there is a spirit of the lungs, and it's the Po, P-O, and it's related to the body. The Po surrounds and adheres to consciousness in order to reflect it. It's from the Golden Flower. The Ling Shu says, that which enters and exits with existence is the Po. So the Po is related to one single lifetime. It's the very physical part of your soul. That's yin, so it's material. And it is from conception and then, from your first breath until your last breath. And it dies and stays here. It does not necessarily continue on into another lifetime. So it's the snippet of a soul's trajectory in just one lifetime. And I love when I work with metal and the lungs, kind of metaphorically, or as an element, I see them as working with time, very, very much so. And there's a rhythm to breathing. Just breathe in and out. That's like the rhythm of life. Okay, now the heart has its own breathing too. And I think that's connected to something different, or just, it's a different type of rhythm. But the lungs is, like inspiration is about in spirit. like having a spirit in a body is related to breathing. And then exhalation, it reminds me of like expiring, like being expired, being dead, like your time is up. Like we're constantly playing with the inhale and exhale, and that is like the rhythm of this life. There's many directions we could go to with working with time, but in the fall time, we are just so busy from the harvest time, the earth time, late summer, early fall is very time dependent. You got to gather food and supplies and harvest things before it all goes to waste. So that is naturally a busy time. You got to acquire stuff, organize it, bring it in, sort it, whatever. And then after that, we come into deep fall, which, is like October, November here in where I live, Northern Hemisphere. And it should be a time of just naturally going inward, like a rest time after the harvest. But we just keep going. It's like we run on these memories of the young fumes of summer, and we go on the adrenaline and the stress hormones and the like chi output of harvest, and we just keep going in fall time. And part of it's because the holidays are coming, and I think it's normal, natural to be busy for winter holiday festivities. I think that's a worthy investment of our energy. It's sometimes the most biggest investment of our energy. But things are just not sustainable in modern culture and capitalism, and like just reading about my own, your Northern European ancestors, the kind of folk holiday traditions, even during Christian times up to this day. But then even, what little is known about prior to Christianity times, the seasonal celebrations were done in community. Like it was not a singular household having Christmas celebration for your mate and your children and maybe your, elders and a cousin or something. It was a whole group of people, like all the people who were of a certain age were doing certain skills, like girls of a certain age were making these sorts of crafts, and other kids of other ages were doing these things, and elders were tending to this and leading that. And we just don't have that now. It's so nuclear and it's such an energy drain. But yet we want to bring in the spirit of the holidays into our life because it is so important to celebrate the internal glow and like life force that we have deep within us, that promise and hope and memory that is, the time of the winter solstice when it's totally dark. And I do it too. I don't think there's anything wrong with it. But like even just me decorating for the holidays at my house and like getting a Christmas tree and getting the decorations out, and I love it, and it does feed me, and it definitely is super important for my kids. They just live for decorations and holidays. But I just wish that I could like go to like, I don't know, like just a little Polish village. I'm thinking here in Portland, I don't know where that would be. Like, some like Scandinavian group where it's, you just go and like we do that all together and we're all helping out, or at least I could contribute, I could pay somebody's wages. Even that, I don't know. I don't even think that's really the essence. Scratch that. Well, I mean, maybe if somebody's working hard, I do want to reimburse them. And, does that make sense? So for those reasons, we just work too hard in the fall. We're too busy. We don't go inwards. And that adds to the deficiencies that we've had this whole time that's been kind of masked by the young brightness of summer and the busyness of fall, and now it's starting to be busyness of harvest time. And now in fall and winter we come into contact with those deficiencies because it's such a yin, material dense time that we come up against the hard points that are like hey, it turns out you don't have enough chi. It turns out that you've been running on fumes. It turns out that without the sun, your inner resources are severely lacking. That's kind of what can be revealed. No, not everybody is that deficient, but many, many of us are. Another thing is, I even just kind of hurts me to say this, but I've heard that Northern European ancestors or people of the northern hemispheres in the winter would sleep 14 to 16 hours a day during the winter. That would be like 7 hours at night and 7 hours during the day, or 8 hours at night, 8 hours during the day. Or it could be just one big long sleep, but people did do 2 sleeps, or like a first sleep and a second sleep, and I think that might have been part of that. So, in fall we kind of start to ease into needing that much sleep. Yeah. Okay, back to the Po. So I kind of got off in a tangent because I was talking about how the Po, the metal element, relates to time, that rhythm of breathing in and out. And to me, it also relates to the animal body, the animal instinctual body that for survival, will acquire what it needs, resources, activities, I don't know, whatever it needs. And then when it doesn't need it anymore, it releases it. The animal body is also an aspect of ourselves that I think, we're human, we're animal, brains are a little bit different. We attach meaning to all sorts of stuff. We get kind of hung up, especially when we're not living in regard to nature. The animal body is a part of us that can have pain and suffering and loss, and it's just a part of life. It's just part of being a body. And of course, we will have emotions and physical symptoms, and it will affect us, but it's the part where I consider, like, how much of this excess suffering do I really need? How much stress do I need to make about being in pain? It's like there's the being in pain, and then there's the stress about being in pain. And that extra stress is normal because we're humans and we have these lives and all of that. But I sometimes like to think of, like, okay, like for my animal body, maybe I want to release that just for the 10 minutes that I lay in bed or something. So, I've always thought that the metal Po animal body has a relationship, and I just read like a week ago that actually that is part of the Po, so that really makes sense to me. It's kind of like how we can dwell in a physical meat suit and not get too hung up about it, if that makes sense. Now, my body's more than a meat suit, but I sometimes like to use those phrases to not get overly like full of my importance as a human. I don't know. No offense to you or anybody else. Like, sometimes I make jokes about those sorts of things, but okay. Metal is related to mountains, and it's condensed earth. It's like earth that's been coming in, and when it condenses, it can come up, and then it's snow-capped, and mountains are between heaven and earth. And in like China, ancient China, the alchemists and the spiritual teachers and spiritual beings would dwell in the mountains. That's like where you could get away from society and those sort of programs and rules and become more in touch with the spiritual nature. Yeah, a lot of alchemists lived in the mountains, and like Gohung would like had this little alchemist who was an actual person, I believe, but also kind of has turned into like a spirit. But he was an alchemist, and he had this little like place inside of a mountain, and there's a little tiny hole to get into it, and nobody knew how he could get in there. But part of the myth is that because he was an alchemist and living this spiritual life, he could bend and change his body like magically, or and fit through these little holes to then live inside of the mountain. Again, it's kind of like bending the physical form, and okay, I'll leave that tangent there. But the metal element is highly spiritual because it's very reflective. So it's like a mirror where we can see ourselves. And condensed earth holds crystals, which is why I'm holding this little one. I mean, medium one. It's actually kind of big, but smoky quartz. It's, you know, the condensed earth is where the metal comes from. It's the energy of crystals and of metal itself. And crystals like quartz are piezoelectric, so they can make a spark and keep time. That's also what makes me think about time with this. And you know, metal is like it's highly conductive, and it's, you know, gold and value and worth. To me, metal is related to kind of a Plutonian experience, an underworld journey where you have to kind of shed the illusions from everyday life and reality and programming. And it's interesting when I say programming, I just think of computer programming and how Silicon, you know, Valley is a part of that. And then, you know, go to kind of your central core of who you are in this lifetime, what that experience is for you, and come in contact with the gems, like, and harvest like the condensed meaning and truth, whatever that is for you. Come in contact with just like the gem of the meaning of a situation or of a time period or of a life or something, and then you can bring that out into the world. So it's very condensing in that way. And, you know, working with sadness and sorrow and grief brings us to the edge of our humanity, and suffering is kind of like part of the human condition or something, at least partially. It's something that we experience. Whether that's inherent, I don't know, but it's something that we do a lot as humans. And just having to come into contact with that, I feel, is in the realm of the lungs and the metal element. Yeah, so this rhythm kind of held within the lung time is beautiful because it can start cycles. It's kind of like part of a cyclical nature. Of course, all seasons are. But I just want to remind myself and you too that the goal is not to like process the grief and reflect about it and then check it off your list and be done and move on to the next season. It's not about like making any of these things go away. The energy of holding and releasing of the lung and large intestine is a continual daily process that we just constantly have to do. We can't escape the cycle of having strong emotions and then letting them go. It's just reminding us to keep that cycle going within us and to work with the natural technology that we have to hold things and let them go. And like the most basic technology is just breathing. So I remember this time, it was actually winter solstice many years ago. One of my friends and I just sat in a snowbank and watching, you know, the sun go down, and my friend, who is a Libra, was like, and I'm a Gemini, so us air signs really love this little game. But for hours we just played this game where she proposed that every breath that we breathed in, that we would imagine like that was our first breath, whether it's your first breath of this life or as if you weren't even like a being that breathed and you were just trying it for the first time. So we'd breathe in as if it was the first breath and like see how you felt about that. And then exhale as if that was your last breath or the only exhale you'll ever do. And so we just played around with that, and it was really fun. And, you know, kids experiment with their breath all the time. Like I have a 6 and a 4-year-old, and they're always like doing things with their mouth and like breathing and holding their breath and blowing things. And it's like, that's your technology. If you can do that, if you know that you can play around with your breath and your voice and your body, like that's half the battle right there of being alive. That's like 50% of the human survival manual is like breathe, use it to your you know, use it to your advantage. It's a tool, it's a technology. And that, I think, is a gift of metal and lung and large intestine. So the lungs connect to the nose. I love that fall time. One of my favorite things about it is that the senses are so heightened. There's the beautiful extreme colors in the leaves. There is the air is crisp and it like holds particles of smell, I believe. And our nose is like more open to some of those things. And you know, marketing of the century has to go to Starbucks for the pumpkin spice trend. I mean, they didn't invent pumpkin spice, but the way that they created like a nostalgia around fall, I mean, they didn't create that. They're just using normal human behavior that in the fall time, our senses are heightened. Our nose is very, very active. And the part of our nose that like the brain that interprets the chemical sense of what we smell is right next to, adjacent, possibly even touching the part of our brain that deals with memories and nostalgia. They're just intricately linked. So it's kind of like they have captured fall and they're like selling it back to us. That's kind of, you know, an oversimplification, but marketing in one way, just in general, is like an exchange of an experience or an emotion that we value and want to invest in. And yeah, pumpkin spice everything, right? For fall, we just love those smells. I find that the sinuses in the head, there's sinus cavities up here. There's acupuncture points that you can actually like tap into them, which is great. There's tiny little holes in the skull. Foramen, those are related to the lungs, I feel. There can be a lot of grief and sadness that stick up in this area. And there's sinuses in the face too. So those are part of the lungs for me, and I think in general. The chest overall is related to the lungs. Of course, the heart energy is here too. The heart and the lungs are neighbors, and they share a lot. Kind of like how the uterus and the large intestines are neighbors. They share a lot too. Like they're intricately linked. Yeah, they're different, but they're kind of a unit at one point. The breasts are related to lungs, breast tissue, chest tissue, kind of going up into the lymphatic system a little bit. And the back of the body, back of the lungs, the scapula, all of that. I think part of the neck to me is related to lungs. Now there's lungs channels going all over the body. And in shiatsu, there's even lung channels in the legs. So, and you can even do microcosms, like how, you know, there's like lung areas in your ear or in your hand or in your foot. So it's everywhere. But, it's nice to bring something, you know, like we think about treating grief here, but don't forget to tune into what your upper back is thinking, or the sadness in your upper sinuses. I feel a lot of sadness often being stored up in here. I don't know why I feel really compelled to just touch it. I have literally just been walking around and like heard these parts of my body go, I'm sad. I'm like, really? Like, wow, okay, my sinuses are talking to me, and I don't even know what they're sad about. But later on, when I get body work or I tune into it, I'm like, oh, okay, yeah, they're holding a certain level of grief up here. Kind of like a grief about the way I thought things would be, as opposed to a grief related to a physical loss in the world I often will hold here. Now, you don't have to hold them like that, like I said. Just follow your own body. But don't limit yourself to just your physical lungs. Just find anywhere that is calling to you if you feel so inclined. Okay, what do I want to say lastly? Before I go into the excess deficiency of the lung, large intestine, and metal element, I just want to talk about Okay, I was gonna give an example of like a lung type constitution, but I'm gonna skip that. I'll talk about it some other time. Because this is now getting me, calling to me. Oh goodness, is this gonna be able to be? It's very reflective. Just like metal. Okay. Okay, so this is just kind of a basic list of what we're going to work with here. And so I'm using pathology, physiology. But remember, this is metaphorical. It's not literally about treating or diagnosing any part of your body. It's more of looking at things through a diagnostic lens, but just to help you differentiate. Because if we do that, we can have a little extra sophistication in how we can meet our needs. It's just another way of inquiring. Like, hey, how do you feel about this? And you're like, sad. I'm like, okay, like, what about it? All right, so here's excess, and the excess lungs, large intestine, metal element will often hold on to worry that tends to be left over, from the summertime, the late summer, early fall time, because worry is related to the spleen and the stomach. So we can just kind of be stuck in worry loops, and thoughts, again, could be related to that. I mean, that's just up for you to inquire and think about. And the emotions that I talked about were grief, sorrow, loss, right? They can be held there. And the physiological thing that we can do with excess, because excess is just saying it's too much. This is too much. That's what excess is. It's like you're full all the way up, and it's either too much, it's like too much for you to handle. And one thing we can do is just let it go. That's like the ultimate saying of the lung and large intestine. And I can't help but think, I have like little kids, and my 4-year-old just sings Frozen all the time, every day. So I hear this, and so if you've seen Frozen, then you know what I'm talking about. If you haven't, spoiler alert, but Elsa is singing her song Let It Go, and she has this power of, freezing things. Now, freezing is kind of, it's water related, and it's related to the kidneys and the water element, but it's also, and how it becomes into a crystalline form is very metal like. And just the fact that she's in a mountain and she's with the snow, that is more metal. And let it go. That's what she wants to do. She can't hold it back anymore. She doesn't want to be constrained by the emotionality and the attachment wounds from her parents just fucking up, helping her deal with her powers. So it's kind of like this lifetime she was dealt not really the greatest card about how to deal with that, and her coping mechanisms are not good. And, they told her, conceal, don't feel. Like, that's how her parents told her to deal. And that is, like, not gonna work for the metal elements. No way. So, yeah, let it go is for surely the lung and large intestine theme. Before I get into the practice, I have to say about the excess that we hold on to, let's say grief, for instance. Now, the point is not to get rid of our grief. I mean, you can ask for that. Like, if it's too much, you can be like, I don't want this anymore. I want to get through this. Yeah, like sometimes we need to like get over things, and only you will know that for you. And sometimes you really want to, and it's just not going to happen. Like, it's very individual and nuanced. So honor where you are. I'm not saying that you have to have grief forever and ever, and it's always going to be hard and whatever. But the whole aspect of working with this is that what is too much, it's like if the grief is too much, then it's continually letting off the excess suffering from the top layer that you can't deal with. Okay, that's what I mean about it. It's not letting the grief go. It's like your experience of the grief that's too much. And what I want to propose to inquire about that is to ask for help. So this is like sharing burdens. Of course, like first and foremost, we need more community, we need family, we need people, like 3D support. We need more material support in our societies and in our communities. So that's for sure, we need that. We need support for our physical body, we need like literal time off, we need more money, we need more resources, all of that. Okay. I know that can be hard, and it's kind of the long game. You know, not that a miracle couldn't happen, I hold out hope, but realistically, what we can think about in sharing these burdens is, first of all, letting go what is not yours. Oh, and this can be hard because you have your own grief, sadness, sorrow, pain, suffering, and it really is yours. Let's say you had a loss, or something didn't work out right, or you know, something happened and it is sad and it's painful, and you wanted something and it didn't work out, or something was taken from you, or like that's rough, right? And now there may be aspects about your own individual legitimate suffering, pain, loss, sorrow, grief that could have been taught or influenced, flavored by the very absorptive lung quality of like absorbing coping mechanisms that maybe worked for your parents or other people in your family, but they don't work for you. Or let's say there were ways that you dealt with pain and loss and grief and suffering before, when you were younger, or even just a week ago, and they don't work for you. So I'm trying to say this the right way. It's like, yeah, let go of things that aren't yours. Don't carry on other people's grief. I know that's harder than said than done. And there's things that need to be addressed about, like, how separate are we? I think that we are not as separate as we think we are. And that idea of individuation and being separate is more of an illusion than not. So I think it's normal to carry other people's griefs and have community collective griefs. That's the whole point of doing it together. You get to hold that for one another. I just learned that the Swedish word for sympathy, I don't remember the word, but the literal translation means co-feel. Like, and it is like, I'm going to show up and feel this with you. We are going to feel this together. And that can take a lot of pain and suffering off of one another. It can reduce that load. That's a literal shared burden. But we tend to accumulate these kind of excess above and beyond what is normal and natural for you. Like, normal grief is like here, let's say, for you. And let's say there's more here, just that's like grief from things you learned in a family unit, grief from I'm just making stuff up, like you know, like coping mechanisms that didn't work are exacerbating your own natural grief. So we're not saying have any of this grief go away. It's not grief be gone. It's take these things off the top that are not working for me. And you may think, oh, I should be able to hold my own grief or sadness. You know, I can do this. If your body's saying it's too much, it's too much. And we need to find a way to hold it or let it go. That's just basically what it comes down to. And so we can ask for sharing burdens of transpersonal ways. So if you're an atheist, you know, I want to include that, but like that could be just writing, venting. I mean, this is not just if you're an atheist, but you know, like symbolic ways, ritualistic ways of releasing these things. I'm gonna leave that there. You know, but if you work with helping spirits or deities or the earth or I don't know, your religion, your spirituality, whatever, like asking, praying, whatever it is, your practice, for help, being like, this is too much, I need help. And then just continually ask whenever you need it. And believe it or not, that is a sharing a burden, even if it's symbolic, even if it's mythology, even if it's a story in your mind. Your mind doesn't care if it's real or not. Your mind is just making up reality anyway. So you might as well make a very nice story or use things symbolically to your advantage. Okay, the shedding part of letting things go, that is so... Okay, let me just draw a picture. I'm gonna draw it here. So in summer, it's like our energy body's like this. And let's say these are like griefs on here, or emotions, worries, thoughts. And we're so much bigger. And then like this is our central core in the middle. So we can exist with a lot of thoughts, feelings, whatever, because our body's energy body is a little bit bigger. And then in the fall time, they all kind of come in, and now 20 of those things you were carrying on, thoughts, worries, griefs, pains, things that belong to other people, collective stuff, extra body tension, whatever, they're now all touching each other, and they're touching you, and you can hardly distinguish what's you and what's them. It becomes an extra burden because of the energetic transference. So, and then this thing happens where, like, have you ever made jelly or jam? When you make jelly, like to test if it's ready to be canned, you dip your spoon into the vat of cooking fruit and sweetener, and you dip your spoon over, and there'll be drops that fall off of the spoon. Drop, drop, drop. But when the drops start to, instead of being two separate drops, they come together and they stick and they make one big drop. It's cloying. It's like, now things jellied. It's the gel point. Now you can can that. It's the perfect gelled consistency. Well, that happens with our energy body and the things that we've been carrying around. It like reaches, they come together, and now you have all these things stuck. But here's the thing, if we can shed the summer part of us, just like think back, I know it was a while ago, shed what was up in summer, just, and it, again, it's not like you're getting rid of the grief or the sorrow, the pain or the suffering, all the mundane, everyday, materialistic things we need to tend to. It's just that you're shedding just an outside layer, or just a little bit. You're taking you're just letting the top off, and some steam is released. And just a little bit of steam is gonna make the pot of boiling water just like, just have that much of a release. And it's a continual process because we're breathing in and out all day long, constantly. It's a continual shedding, like, okay, does that make sense? And with these sharing of burdens of things that are too much, one suggestion of a practice is just one of many, and it deserves its own video someday perhaps, but is to kind of sweep out, like, imagine you're taking a breath in through the top of your head and bringing it to the chest. Now, it's just symbolically, but like I said, your brain doesn't care. Just can help. The breath will anchor your imagination in time and space in the body. And so breathing in, bringing the breath into the chest, and then breathing out. Like, imagine, like, I'm pushing everything out of me that's not mine. Each breath, just imagine you're breathing like a spoke on a wheel, just the back of the body, the side of the body, and just do it as many times as you need. Clean it out, sweep it out. You're not getting rid of your own stuff. You can't magically transform all the hard emotions. You're just continually getting rid of the things that you've accumulated, the stressors that have become too much and started to compound and stick, okay? And this can be done anywhere. It can be done in the pelvis. The pelvic bowl is a wonderful place to sweep out, like with a imaginary broom, and then have it come down the legs and into the earth, and just give it to the earth, compost it. It'll deal with it. The earth knows what's up. She'll take it. Another thing is you can then send the energies that didn't get composted or that still bother you, like a second layer to it, is to send, imagining you're kind of packaging up those excess things that are too much to handle right now, up an escalator to the ancestors in the sky or the center of the universe. It's big, it's fast. Dilution is the solution to pollution. Not like carrying excess grief is like pollution. I don't want to put a cleanliness morality spin on it, but it's just so big up there. Like they'll take whatever you don't need. You know, it's just one drop in a huge expanse of a universe. So go ahead, send it up. And by the time it gets up there, it'll probably be transformed just by like getting out of this realm. So, and those things can be done every day, constantly, or just in a time where you have an afternoon or evening and really sit down and journal about like, what am I holding on to from summer? What do I need to shed? How do I want to imagine that I'm shedding? How am I going to share these burdens in my daily life? And with real people, if possible. You can use some visioning, or, you know, literally ask for help. That's always nice too. And release what is not yours, whatever part of your body. There's something else that came up, but I forgot. Must not have been important. Okay. And then we have deficiencies. Deficiencies are when things are not enough. Deficiencies tend to be more on the material side of us. And so it's a lack, it's not enough. Excess is too much, deficiencies not enough. What don't you have enough of? It's a good time to shore up your physical body. But generally we feel cold, we feel tired, and we feel down. And then a big thing, I didn't write it here, but it's lack of support. We don't have enough support. The energy to work with is holding. It's just like holding and receiving. So materially, we can help work with the body to hold and receive, like the literal things we need, like, you know, iron deficiency. I mean, I don't want to get too into the body because this wasn't really about like that aspect, but you can take an inventory of what you need. What do you need? More digestive fire? Do you need more nutrients on a certain level? Like, what are you craving? What do you want? Like, that's the material that you can invest in, which will come and feed you back. It's very useful for deficiencies, is to really work on the literal foundation of your body and your health and your life. And then receiving and holding are they're challenging to do, and both of them deserve their own video. But it's, imagine that you are asking for help, whether it's from people or in real life, or transpersonal help, or even from your higher self. Now it's one thing to imagine that like you're laying in your power place in the middle of a landscape that you love. Like, just imagine you're doing a visualization. You're laying on the earth and you are open to receive golden light, milk and honey that will nourish you forever. And you can imagine that you're being held by the earth itself, just like a baby's held within the arms. You can imagine and, you know, literally work on receiving and holding. But there is another layer where like the deeper parts of you might not be able to hold that. So for a while I was imagining, or I worked with a practitioner, and she was like, you need to receive, like just open up and receive it. And that will help some of these deficiencies that we're working on. And what I found is that I could flood myself with all the bone broth, all the food, like, you know, all of the nutrients, all of the rest, all of the love, all of it, but it wasn't being absorbed and then held in like what I considered to be my symbolic cells, like deep within myself. In my mind, I saw that my cells were like, you can surround me with nutrients and love and support and warmth, but my cells were just so closed because of a protective mechanism. Like they one time didn't receive everything that they needed. And so for self-preservation, very intelligently, they solved the problem the best they could by being like, instead of being like, I'm open, feed me, I need stuff, I'm hungry, it was like, okay, we're just shutting down. It's a lot easier to function at 50% than to be like vulnerable and open. Like, are you gonna feed me? Are you gonna feed me? So, that's an example from me, but as a whole, we're just we don't get enough support from one another. We don't get enough help. We don't have enough time. We literally are nutrient deprived. Like our soil is lacking nutrients and our food supply. And it's just like, even if I wanted to and I had all the resources, it's hard to even cook to like as much as my body needs. Just literal everyday time constraints, money constraints, energy constraints. So we got to maximize our ability to receive and hold. One way that I like to practice holding, being held, is to just lay down in the bed under blankets, maybe even put a weighted blanket or extra pillow on you, and just for 5 to 12 minutes, set a timer, and just tune into your shoulders, the back of your lungs, as it lays on the bed, and just like, am I being held? Am I allowing myself to be held? Or am I pushing down? Like, where is your body comfortable? Is it comfortable with being held? I mean, you can recruit people in your life. If you have people that you're intimate with or that you have hugs and whatever, you can have them hold you for 5 to 12 minutes. That's another way. And then really kind of melt into their hug or their embrace and see if you can just accept that. It's like training ourselves to be held. But a mantra doesn't really do it for me. An affirmation does not do it. I really have to work with the body. Lay down and be like, shoulders, musculature, neurology, brain. You're going to be held now. Or can you be held? If you can't, why? What do you need? How can I help you? And so working with that dynamic is a really fun exercise. I don't know. I think it's fun. The reason I think it's fun is because biofeedback is exciting and interesting to me. So if you listen to what your body's doing and just be like, is there tension here, or am I able to relax into the bed? It is really good neural feedback, and it's just stimulating to the brain. It's a place to put your energy, and it can be really, really relaxing. So we at least get the benefit of playing with neural feedback and somatic experiencing. Okay, one thing I remembered I wanted to say about the shedding of the excess things that are too much is making a body journal. Speaking of somatic experiencing. So a body journal would be, I do a body journal, like an organ journal and an emotion journal. So, it's a time with the lung and the large intestine and metal element. So you could, as a suggestion, just start with like grief journal, sadness journal, like write that on the top of a line, and then just write for 5 to 12 minutes. I love 5 to 12. I don't know why. Set a timer or go as long as you want to, and just let the sadness and the grief speak. Give it the microphone. And if it wants to go to the so-called pity or feeling sorry for itself or being like, how come I didn't get this and other people have this and it makes me mad, go there and just let them say what it needs to say. Sometimes it's hard to get them to say what they need to say, but just if you start the conversation and give it the space, as a practice, it often picks up momentum after like the third time trying. So that's a good thing to practice. And then while you're at it, you might as well just do an anger journal. What are you pissed off about? That's a good one, especially for those that are menstruating around PMS time. That is useful. And, you know, fear journal is good too. It's hard sometimes to get the fear to come out in words, but we can work on it and we can train it. And fear is the feeling, the emotion associated with winter, which is just around the corner. So we can maybe get the ball rolling with that. I mean, it's up to you. You can do whatever you want. I mean, you can do gratitude journal as well. I'd be a little wary about that because sometimes we smother like our you know, feelings of worry and like things not being fair with like, well, I have this good thing and that's great. Like, I love to be appreciative. It's a very, very important medicine for the heart. But it's not about toxic positivity or gaslighting yourself. It's about just letting all of the emotions out, including the so-called ugly ones. And I don't mean that to be judgy. I love ugly things. I think ugly things are great. Like, I love the embracing the inner hag. I love that time and energy. So let it come out. You know, something wonderful about being like displeasing or unacceptable. So and then the other one is to do an organ journal or a body part journal. So it's like, what do the lungs have to say? What do the back have to say? What does your sinuses have to say? And if you don't want to journal, you can also record it like on a voice memo app or something. That can be helpful when you're working with the head or the throat, like this area, to just speak, let it out. But not always, you know, it's up to you. Okay, so that was just a bunch of stuff about large intestine, lungs, metal, and it didn't even scratch the surface. I mean, there's so much that we can do, but I hope it was an inspiration to, like, if you just want to throw all of this out and do your own thing, that's great. Like, follow your body, follow whatever you want to follow. I'm body centric, so I will always say that, but I know that not everybody's body centric, you know, but my body is how I get intuitive data. It's how I get information. It's how I listen to myself. It's the channel between heaven and earth for me. And I hear people say, like, get out of your body, like, and I'm like, why would I want to do that? Like, for me, it works to go into my body, and then I can go anywhere I want through this vehicle, because it's where, you know, related to the Po, it's where the Po holds the consciousness. It holds the spirit in this life to the body. So this is a very good time to be reflective of how that's working for you. And it includes coming up against some of the harder emotions that we have, right? So anyways, I hope you have a great rest of your fall. And okay, take care. Bye.